Before we dive in today, did you know that there are over 50 full-length bonus episodes waiting for you on Patreon? Well, if you didn't, now you do. This month alone, I covered the Crestview family murders, which is a shocking Florida death penalty case that just ended earlier this year. Last month, I unpacked Alabama's Sarah Starr murder-for-hire case. And did you know that there was a chilling Offutt Air Force Base case where a wannabe serial killer detailed his plan to kill and then followed through with it? If you're craving more, head to patreon.com/militarymurder or tap the link in the show notes. All right, True Crime Army, let's get into today's episode.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Between two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and a VPN, you try to be in control of how your info is protected. But many other places also have it, and they might not be as careful. That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast for 40% off. Terms apply.
June 21st, 2020, it was Father's Day in the small rural town of Richburg, South Carolina. That afternoon, just after 12:15 p.m., a frantic 911 came into the Chester County Sheriff's Office. A young man, breathless, panicked, he claimed that he had just walked into his grandparents' home and discovered a horrific scene. His voice cracked through the receiver as he cried, "There's blood all over. I think someone executed them." When authorities arrived at the modest mobile home on Doe Street, they were greeted by the caller. The caller was 24-year-old Jean Alexander Scott. And just as he had said, the scene inside was gruesome. 2 bodies shot in the head, lying lifeless. But what had originally looked like a tragic double homicide would slowly unravel into something much more chilling. This case would take investigators on a winding journey involving military service, financial disputes, internet breadcrumbs, and a shocking betrayal hiding in plain sight. Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, veteran and former active duty JAG, and this is Military Murder, a show where I focus on crimes committed by military members and veterans. Because let's be honest, we all want to be in the know when crimes occur in our community. And I am here since 2009, bringing you all of these stories. If you're new here, hi everyone. Just so that you are aware, this episode is available in video format on both YouTube and Spotify, and audio wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to be kept in the know with all things military true crime, be sure to subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. All right, you know the warnings. There is no military endorsement here at all. All opinions are my own. With that, join me today as I tell you about a tragic Father's Day 2020 double homicide out of South Carolina. This is the case of Jean and Billie Rogers. Now, let's dig in.
Military Murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
When deputies entered the Rogers home, they were met with what one investigator would later call a textbook execution scene. Jean Rogers, 61 years old, was found in a pool of blood, and not far from his body was his 78-year-old mother, Billie Ruth. Both had been shot in the back of the head, cold, calculated, and very close range. There was no sign of forced entry, no ransacked drawers, no missing valuables. Whoever did this to this family had come in, knew the home, and left quietly. Standing outside, trying to catch his breath and control his sobs, was the grandson, Jean Alexander Scott, and I will be calling him Alex. He told deputies that he had just driven in from Columbia about an hour away, and he was there to visit his grandfather. He said he walked in and immediately saw blood. The horror on his face as he was telling the investigators this seemed real. His words were frantic. His clothes appeared clean. I mean, it seemed like he was telling the truth. But there was something about his performance that made deputies raise an eyebrow. One officer later recalled thinking that this guy was just hitting all the notes a little too perfectly. Another noted that Alex kept saying things like, "It's like they were executed." Now, we haven't even mentioned that word yet, is what the police investigators thought. But, we'll go with it. It was still too early to tell anything, and they were, in that moment, in evidence-gathering mode. Alex was a witness, a grieving family member who had just walked into a horrifying scene. Of course, it was prudent for investigators to swab his hands and his clothes for gunshot residue, GSR, and they checked for blood spatter around, on his clothes and on his body, but that all came back clean. Alex's initial statement to authorities was as follows. He claimed that he had been in Colombia about an hour away earlier that morning with a friend, and that he arrived at his grandparents' house at 12:15 p.m. to find the door open and their bodies on the floor. And he was there that day specifically for Father's Day, and he even had a card with him. He immediately went outside after finding the bodies. He threw up, and then he had to actually wave down a neighbor to use their phone to call 911 because he told investigators that he had his phone, but it was locked in his car, and for some reason or another, he couldn't access it immediately. When questioned, he had no idea who could have done this to his grandparents. He theorized that maybe someone broke in, or maybe it was some kind of vengeance by some sort of family enemy. The story really did position Alex as having an alibi. He was out of town during the time of the murders. So let me tell you a little bit about the victims. Gene Rogers was a hardworking family man in his early 60s. He lived in a modest mobile home in Richburg, South Carolina, and his 78-year-old mother, Billie Ruth Rogers, lived with him for company, right? Because she was getting up there in her age. By all accounts, Gene was a devoted son and grandfather. In fact, one of the people that Gene Sr. doted on was his step-grandson, Gene Alex Scott. Alex wasn't Gene's biological grandson, but Gene treated him just like family. And in fact, Alex's mother named him after Gene because Alex's mom loved and treated Gene like her own father. Billie, as the great-grandmother, she helped raise Alex during his childhood. They were a close-knit family across many generations. And I learned through my research that Alex's mom passed away from an overdose in 2014. And honestly, the family didn't know where Alex's father was. So Alex Scott grew up with the Rogers as his elders, and, they raised him. They helped to raise him. And he entered young adulthood following in their patriotic footsteps. You see, in 2016, fresh out of high school, Alex enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps. He served as an ammunition technician, and he was stationed at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina for some time. After serving his 4 years, by January of 2020, Alex finished his stint in the Marine Corps and returned to civilian life. But he wasn't planning to stay idle for very long. Alex had talked a big game about his future plans. He wanted to start his own private security business and make a name for himself as an entrepreneur. And to do that, he needed money. And that's where his family ties came into play. Gene Rogers was proud of his grandson's service, and he was proud of his ambitions. He wanted to start a business, and he actually wanted to help, and he tried to. Earlier in 2020, Gene had given Grandpa had given his grandson a large sum of money. It is estimated that he gave him about $80,000. And he did this to invest in Alex's dream of starting the security company. I mean, it was an enormous amount of money, a huge gesture of support and generosity. Shoot, I wish I had grandparents who would give me and write me an $80,000 check. But listen, for Alex, $80,000 still wasn't enough. He soon came back to his grandfather asking for more financial help. Maybe he needed money to get the business off the ground, but, he had $80,000. This time, though, when he asked for money, Gene Rogers drew a line. He was like, no, I cannot give you additional funds. And he even questioned Alex, what happened to the $80,000 that I gave you originally? When investigators learned about this huge sum of money, they wondered if this was a motive. Was it the fact that Grandpa said no? Well, it definitely gave investigators more to look into. So let's go back a little bit and talk about the crime scene. The first big clue at the crime scene came in what was missing. The crime scene was pristine. In fact, it was too pristine. There were no defensive wounds. I mean, there was one tiny defensive wound, but nothing major. There were no broken windows, no sign of panic, or no signs of a struggle. Whoever killed Jean and Billie had likely walked in, stood close, and pulled the trigger, not once, but twice. The murder weapon, well, it was gone, just as the suspect was. Detectives interviewed everyone, and they looked into Alex's alibi, which, when they looked into it, it did pan out. He was, in fact, with a friend at the time of the alleged murders. But investigators quickly realized that they'd have to really do some digging to get to the bottom of this double homicide. And something inside of them made them want to look into Alex just a little bit closer. So they started by pulling his phone records. And that's when they noticed an inconsistency. At the exact time that Alex claimed to be arriving at his grandparents' home, his phone had actually already been pinging in that area. So if he had, no kidding, just arrived and found his grandparents and called 911, why would his phone have already been in that area prior to his alleged arrival? So that was something that they were like, okay, this isn't, adding up. Then they looked into his internet history, and that's when things got really dark. Days before the murders, Alex had Googled things like how to clean up gunshot residue, how much life insurance pays after murder, and he even Googled, does life insurance pay out if you kill someone? Yikes. Not looking too good for this guy, because why would he be Googling these things a few days before the murders? Now, listen, you might actually find these type of searches in a true crime podcaster's, web history, but this just seemed too convenient. It screamed premeditation. But investigators still needed more, so they kept pressing, all the while keeping a close eye on Alex. But do you know what Alex was doing while the investigation was going on? Well, it seems that right after the double murder, remember, he was a former Marine, he was a Marine veteran, and he wanted to start a security business. But after the double murder, he abandoned his plans and he joined the Army instead. Yep, within a year of the murders, Alex was wearing the Army uniform, active duty soldier, and now he was stationed in Germany. But he was the prime suspect of a double murder. But you know what? Someone commented on my TikTok when I did a TikTok on this a few years back. They were like, oh, well, they were probably happy he was in the military because now they could keep a close eye on him. So the Chester County authorities enlisted the help of the South Carolina State Law Enforcement Division, also known as SLED, and they even enlisted the help of the FBI. And eventually the Army CID, and I read somewhere that even NCIS got involved. But now I'm getting ahead of myself. This case first hit my radar when I saw information about this case in somewhere that I thought was a little bit unexpected, kind of. The TV show Cold Justice. In 2021, the Oxygen Network's true crime series Cold Justice got wind of the Rogers double murder. And the show sends veteran investigator like former prosecutor Kelly Siegler to help local law enforcement crack difficult unsolved cases. And although this case wasn't really like cold, it did appear that it was getting there. Chester County authorities agreed to let the Cold Justice team assist, and their timing was perfect. More than a year had passed since the murders, and a fresh set of eyes was very much welcome. And you can watch the full episode on this case right now. So when you watch it, it will be right up until an arrest is made. But I'll get into that right now. When the Cold Justice team arrived in South Carolina, they dug into the case files and they brought in expert analysis. One big break came from digital forensics. Now, we already talked about the Google searches, but also on Alex's search history was him trying to figure out what the penalties were for murder in South Carolina. Can you imagine learning, without shock, that you can get the death penalty for murder in the state and still proceeding with not one, but two murders? I mean, it's a little bit absurd. Well, these searches were virtually a blueprint of the crime's motive and Alex's attempt to outsmart investigators. The fact that Alex was Googling gunshot residue suggested that he was worried about getting gunshot residue on himself, and it actually might explain why none was found on him the day of the double homicide. And the life insurance question, it pointed to a no-kidding financial motive. Prosecutors would later argue that Alex hoped to cash in on Gene Rogers' life insurance policy, and he wanted to tap into Gene's retirement accounts after the murders. And it turns out that by killing his grandfather, Alex actually did stand to benefit financially because he was one of the beneficiaries. Those internet searches were like neon signs pointing straight to guilt. Cold Justice's involvement also helped unravel Alex's alibi. Remember that Alex had claimed that he was in Colombia with a friend at the time of the killings. Well, investigators identified that friend, and it was a fellow former Marine buddy of Alex's who lived in Florida. And it appeared that this friend initially was like, yeah, okay, I was with Alex. I was with Alex the entire time, effectively giving him a false alibi for the morning of the murders. However, under scrutiny, the alibi fell apart, and this guy eventually would take the stand and say, yeah, I lied to investigators initially, but finally I decided to tell the truth. In addition to this, phone records and cell tower data showed the timing and locations didn't line up with what Alex was claiming occurred that morning. By October of 2021, armed with the digital evidence, inconsistencies in Alex's story, and a growing pile of circumstantial evidence, law enforcement was ready to move. A Chester County grand jury indicted Gene Alexander Scott on 2 counts of murder. It was for Gene and for Billie, and they also indicted him on 1 count of possession of a weapon during a violent crime. Sheriff Max Dorsey announced that they finally had enough evidence to charge Alex, though he didn't detail all the evidence publicly. One line from the press release said it all. Quote, a former Marine from Florida is accused of providing Scott with a false alibi for the time of the killings, end quote. And this confirmed that investigators believed that Alex had orchestrated an entire cover story from the get-go. There was one slight complication. Alex was literally an ocean away. But that didn't stop the long arm of justice. In late October 2021, U.S. military police in Germany located and arrested specialist Gene Alex Scott on his base. But I bet you that Alex was cocky enough to think that this was never going to happen. However, it did. He was arrested and quickly returned to South Carolina, where he was transferred to the Chester County Detention Center. And that's where he would be awaiting trial. After 16 months of evasive freedom, Alex Scott was finally behind bars, accused of an unthinkable crime of murdering the very people who raised him and loved him the most.
Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
Choice Hotels get you more for your money so you can maximize any road trip. Let's get real close to hear the maximum sizzle of Comfort Inn's free hot breakfast. Maximized. Check into more. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Home means something different to everyone. But with Rocket Mortgage, home can mean even more. It can mean a college education, taming your high-interest debt, even a renovation. We've made it easier than ever to use your home equity. That home you worked so hard for, now it can work hard for you. Call 800-4ROCKET or visit rocket.com to find out more.
Rocket Mortgage, LLC. Licensed in all 50 states. NMLSConsumerAccess.org. Number 3030.
Nearly 4 years after Gene and Billie were found murdered in their home, the case finally made it to trial. It was May 2024, and Gene Alex Scott was now 26 years old. He sat at the defense table in a suit, not a uniform, but you could still see that military bearing, straight back, stiff shoulders, eyes locked forward, taking furious notes as each witness testified. In the gallery, the people who mattered most. Gene and Billie's family packed into those pews every single day. They wore shirts with the victims' faces, lapel pins with their names. You know, they wanted the jury and Alex to remember who this entire trial was about. And when the prosecution stood up, they didn't hold back. They told the jury that this wasn't some senseless act of violence. No, this was cold, it was calculated, and it was all about money. They painted the picture of a grandfather who gave his grandson a whopping $80,000, and that grandson wanted more. But when Grandpa said no, that was the very moment, prosecutors said, that Alex started seeing his grandfather not as family, but as a paycheck. Because if Gene died, Alex stood to inherit even more. Life insurance, retirement accounts, property, and that life insurance policy alone was estimated at $700,000. And that's not just speculation. The prosecutors had receipts. A digital forensic expert took the stand and laid it all out. You see, there were the Google searches that Alex had made in the days leading up to the murder. Things like how to get rid of gunshot residue. Does life insurance pay out in murder cases? And what's the death penalty? Does South Carolina have a death penalty? I mean, these weren't curious questions. This wasn't a kid watching too much true crime TV. This was someone researching how to commit and get away with murder. The prosecution wasn't done, though. Not even close. They brought witness after witness to show just how much thought had gone into this crime and how much work went into covering it up. One officer testified that on the morning of the murders, Alex sold a gun and a pair of night vision goggles. Just casually got rid of them on the morning of the murders. I mean, is that a coincidence? Investigators didn't think so. Investigators believed that that wasn't just a coincidence, it was a cleanup. That gun, well, it could have been the murder weapon. However, they never found it. And the goggles, well, maybe it was used to sneak in or out of the house completely unseen. Either way, it looked like Alex was trying to make key evidence disappear before anyone ever knew that there was even a crime scene to investigate. But that wasn't the only smoking gun in the prosecution. You see, they had a former friend of Alex's take the stand, and this guy's name was Evan Webb. Evan testified that not too long before the murders, Alex called him, Evan, and 3 others to his house to discuss a plan. You see, Alex wanted to kill his grandfather, and he wanted to kill him because he stood to inherit $700,000. And not only did he stand to gain this much money, he enlisted his friends and was like, hey, listen, you guys can help me get rid of him. And for that, I will pay you $10,000. At least that's how much Evan stood to gain. And that's what he testified to. The initial go day was May 9th, 2020. Evan testified that he was planning to stay home with Alex's cell phone and some other guy's cell phone. And the reason that he was going to stay with these cell phones was so that the phones wouldn't ping near the crime scene. I mean, maybe Alex does watch a little bit too much true crime TV because that's something that I have learned over the years. So anyway, Alex and his friend were then going to drive to Alex's grandfather's house, and they weren't going to drive right up to the house, right? They were going to park about a mile away, and from there, they were going to trek through the woods without being detected. And Alex, he seems to really watch too much true crime TV because he was going to wear a weighted vest. Now, he wore this weighted vest because he wanted his footprints to appear differently than they would with his actual weight. Once they trekked through the woods, and I'm assuming that Alex was the one who was going to be, the killer. Once they trekked through the woods, he was going to commit the murder. He was then going to track back, disassemble the gun, and dispose of the weapon in different areas. That way, they would never find the murder weapon. Well, from what I read, Evan testified that everything was in place for May 9th, and they actually went out there. But apparently, Alex and the other guy got spooked off by a barking dog. So the plan was aborted. Like, abort the plan, abort the plan, abort the plan. But then it seems like they actually went through with their intentions in June. Now, I know what you're thinking, and I just want you to know, I haven't read anything about the other accomplice. And the news reports on this specific case were scant with regards to this information. Now, I'm not sure if Evan testified under a grant of immunity or if he just didn't participate in the follow-up crime or when it was actually to take place, which was in June of 2020. So I can look into that, but I haven't found anything. Or let me know in the comments if you know what happened or if he just decided to do it alone that day. In any event, this was damning testimony for Alex because before we had all this other circumstantial evidence. And even though this was circumstantial evidence, we now have this witness saying like, hey, we had this entire plan. Like it was 5 of us and we were game to participate in it. In addition to Evan's testimony, there was someone else who testified who provided pretty damning testimony. And that was the former cellmate of Alex while he was in jail awaiting the trial. And this guy's name was David James. David had shared a cell with Alex at the Chester County Jail right after his immediate arrest in 2021. And according to this guy, Alex liked to talk, and he liked to talk a lot. David testified that Alex told him everything, that he had shot his grandfather and great-grandmother point blank, that he'd planned it out and that he'd been smart about it, so he was never going to actually get caught. He even bragged, that when he joined the Army after the murders, he downplayed his Marine background. He told the recruiters that he barely had any firearms training. And he did this because if the military didn't know how good of a marksman he really was, maybe no one would connect the dots if word about his grandparents' double homicide ever made it back to like his comrades and his leadership. You know, for someone who watches a lot of true crime, this guy, it clearly appears that he does talk a lot. The prosecution told the jury that this isn't just a circumstantial case or that his statements weren't just circumstantial. They were like, this is a confession straight from Alex's mouth told to someone who had nothing to gain. I mean, this guy in his jail cell, maybe he could get some redemption, or maybe he could remove his own guilt for whatever crime he was in jail for, but he really had nothing to gain from coming forward and saying that this guy said that, right? And also, let's not forget that this is corroborating evidence to what Alex had already told these other friends of his. Well, investigators who were there on day 1 also took the stand. And one deputy recalled how Alex was sobbing and pacing when they showed up to the crime scene, but that something about it didn't feel right. Now, when this was first reported on, I remember seeing body cam footage in the news, but I haven't been able to find that footage. But that evidence was also introduced at trial. The jury watched as Alex wailed and cried and paced back and forth. But instead of being in shock, when you actually closed your eyes and listened to what he was saying, it did appear that Alex was more of a narrator. In one moment, you can hear Alex say, quote, "It's like somebody executed them," end quote. And the prosecution, well, they pounced on that line. He's acting, they told the jury. He's telling you what to think. He's planting a seed that someone else did this. Someone mysterious, someone unknown, but that someone doesn't exist because the killer was standing right there, narrating the scene like a director on a movie set. After the testimony came the forensics. The pathologist took the stand and walked the jury through the autopsy reports. What they heard was heartbreaking and chilling. Both Jean and Billie had been shot from behind at close range. The bullets had a slight downward angle, which told the pathologist something very specific. Jean and Billie were either seated or maybe even kneeling when the shots were fired. They never saw it coming. Billie did have, one very small defensive wound on her hand, and it was a graze that suggested that maybe she was the second one who was shot, and maybe it suggested that she tried to protect herself. Maybe she raised her hand in fear. Maybe she reached for help. Either way, it didn't save her. But that wound, that small defensive wound, it told the story. One of trust being broken in the most violent way possible. Then came the crime scene analysts. They focused on something a little less gory, but it was just as telling. It was geometry. They focused on the geometry of the shots that had been fired. They mapped out the Rogers mobile home, the doors, the hallway, the angles, and they told the jury something subtle but huge. Alex's initial story about walking in and seeing his grandfather's body from the entryway, well, that wasn't possible, not physically. From the angle of the door and the narrowness of the hallway, it was impossible to see Jean's body from where Alex claimed that he first stood. And that detail, well, it hit differently because now the jury had to ask themselves, was Alex really discovering a scene as soon as he called 911? Or was he returning to one that he himself helped to create? But the defense, when it was their turn, they weren't going down without a fight. They pointed out correctly that there was no direct evidence tying Alex to the murders. There were no fingerprints, no murder weapon, no blood, no gunshot residue. They told the jury that this case was built on circumstance and suspicion, not proof. They argued that the investigators had made up their minds way too fast, that once they zeroed in on Alex and their instincts, they never looked anywhere and they got tunnel vision. And they reminded the jury of one thing. Alex had never confessed, not to police, not in writing, not in court. He had denied this from day one. Was it possible, the defense asked, that someone else had done this? Someone unknown, some person with a grudge, someone who slipped in, executed the pair, and then left without a trace. They floated that idea. They floated the theory of a robbery gone wrong, a vendetta that no one saw coming. And then, in a move that stunned the entire courtroom, Alex took the stand. Now, if you are a part of the True Crime Army, you know that this almost never happens. Most defense attorneys beg their clients not to testify in a murder trial. But Alex, he insisted. He wanted the jury to hear it from him. He wanted to say it under oath. He looked those jurors dead in the eyes and said that he was innocent. He told them that on Father's Day 2020, he was in Colombia spending time with a friend. Then he left later that morning and drove down to Richburg to check in on his grandparents. He even had a Father's Day card because it was Father's Day. He said that that's when he walked into the house and stepped into a nightmare. His grandfather, Jean, was slumped over. His great-grandmother, Billie, she was on the floor lifeless. He panicked. He freaked out. And he may have seemed off, he said. But if he was acting weird, it was trauma. He denied everything. He said he didn't kill them. He had nothing to do with their murder. And those internet searches about gunshot residue and life insurance payout, he was like, listen, that was a coincidence. He said he was curious, just looking things up, like people do sometimes. But the prosecution, well, they had timestamps that placed those searches dangerously close to the time of the murders. And was it a coincidence, Well, Alex even addressed the $80,000 elephant in the room. He claimed that his grandfather offered it up freely. There was no fight, no animosity. He was grateful for that money. He even asked the jury a question. Why would I kill the person who believed in me the most? He threw out the idea that maybe someone else had a motive, maybe another family member, maybe a stranger who just broke in. Well, you know what? After direct examination, you can say whatever you want. But after that, you have to face a cross-examination. And the prosecutor stood up, calm but sharp, and began slicing through Alex's story. They asked, if you were still in Colombia that morning, why was your phone pinging right near the crime scene when it shouldn't have been? Why did your Marine buddy lie for you unless, you had told him to lie for you because you had something to cover up? And what about those Google searches? Do you expect the jury to believe that how to get away with murder just happened to show up in your web browser on the exact day that your grandparents were murdered? Well, Alex shook his head. He called it a coincidence. Again, this was just a coincidence.
Sign everything I could do and put $100 bills in it. I just brought it to him to let him know that he was my father.
Because if you were going to put $100 bill in it, you'd have to get it from him, wouldn't you?
Why would I lie about something so simple as SOS on my phone, ma'am?
Well, honestly, I don't know. Maybe because you murdered two people?
I did not murder my grandfather or Billy. Period.
So you had some pretty big dreams in regards to the business that you were starting back in 2020, didn't you?
Correct. I was a 20-year-old. I had extremely big goals like most 20-year-olds.
Okay. And in regards to that dream that you had, the only way that you were going to be able to have that dream come true was going to be to actually get that money from Gene.
About the 401k?
Well, just money in general.
Correct, yes.
You didn't have money.
No, I was always betting money.
Exactly. So you had to get that money, and then whenever the money ran out, because of going to strip clubs, buying way too expensive equipment, food, rent, all these things that you talked about, then you went back to the same person that you had gone to before for more money.
I had, yes.
Yes. And then whenever, as Aaron testified, he turned you down.
He did not turn me down, Ms. Lyle. He wrote me another check.
Hold on a minute. I'm not talking about the $2,500 check. We'll get to
Both
that.
of them?
Either one, both, it doesn't matter.
But you just said he wasn't giving me money back, Ms. Lyle.
Well, you know what,
It seems he was.
Mr. Scott, if you don't give me the chance to ask you a
I'm
question,
sorry. You're right.
then nobody's going to know what the heck you're talking about right now, okay?
Of course.
All right, so let me ask the question.
Of course.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Now, we all know how smart you are, but you got to give me a chance.
I'm not that smart. Please don't make me seem like I'm a narcissist. Don't speak for my mental ability.
I don't have to make anybody think you're a narcissist. You're doing a good job of that yourself. Did you kill Jimmy?
I did not. There is no amount of life insurance, no amount of me going less broke than I've been when I was still a beneficiary only 4 hours away. There's no amount of money, no amount of anything that's going to cause me to kill Jimmy, period.
Thank you.
After 2 weeks of testimony and of evidence, the case finally went back to the jury. It was time to deliberate. And when they returned their verdict, it was clear. One thing was clear, at least. It was clear that they didn't believe a single word that Alex said on the stand. In May 2024, the jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict on all charges. Gene Alexander Scott was convicted of the murders of Gene Rogers and Billie Rogers, as well as the weapons charge for using a firearm in a violent crime. Some jurors later spoke out and they said that the web of circumstantial evidence taken together was just way too overwhelming. The internet searches, the false alibi, the motive, the inconsistent statements, the jailhouse confession. I mean, it all squarely pointed to Alex. And why would, this cellmate and then his friends turn on him when, they had nothing to gain by saying that Alex did it? When the verdict was read, Alex showed little emotion except for shaking his head back and forth. The man who had sobbed theatrically on camera at the crime scene, well, now he stood eerily stoic as he was pronounced guilty.
The rural way of life is about making everyone feel at home. Tractor Supply chose advanced 5G solutions from T-Mobile for Business to transform intelligent customer service. Together, we put the power of AI to work across 2,200 stores, keeping things running seamlessly inside, curbside, and countryside. This is elevated customer experience. This is Tractor Supply with T-Mobile for Business. Take your business further at T-Mobile.com/now.
What's worse than an ad interrupting your favorite music or podcast? That uninspired coffee you've been drinking while working, which is why Flavia is elevating your everyday coffee experience. Now you can enjoy cafe-quality beverages like coffee, tea, frothy lattes, and creamy hot chocolate made right in your home office, actual office, or wherever you want to upgrade your mug with bold, delicious flavors. Visit Flavia.com to shop the collection of machines and beverages now.
With the guilty verdict in, the only thing left was sentencing. Gene and Billie Rogers' family, the same people who had once loved Alex like a son, a grandson, a nephew, well, now they had their chance to stand up and speak through their pain. One by one, they gave their victim impact statements. Through tears, they talked about who Gene and Billie were, the laughter, the kindness, the Sunday dinners, the wisdom, two people who were taken in the most violent, senseless way imaginable on Father's Day. But it wasn't just about who they lost. It was about how they lost them. Because this wasn't just some stranger, right? This was someone they trusted, someone who ate at their table on Sundays, someone they helped to raise. And now they learned that he was the one responsible. One family member called the verdict bittersweet. Yes, justice was done, but it didn't bring Billie and Gene back. And it meant facing a very bitter truth no one ever wants to face, that someone you love is capable of something so cruel. During sentencing, one of Billie's sons, during his opportunity to speak to the judge, he played voicemails from his brother and mom. And he did this so that the judge could hear their voice because they were no longer able to speak for themselves. And honestly, I'm going to play those clips for you here. And I thought that listening to those voicemails was very powerful.
All right, love you. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
My mom, I have like 10, and I play them over when I need that lifting just to hear her voice. Because, you know, in time, you start not hearing what they sounded like.
And I love you. Bye, baby boy.
That's all I have left.
In South Carolina, each murder charge can carry up to life in prison. And the prosecution made it clear that that was exactly what they were asking for. They told the court that this wasn't just a double homicide. It was a cold-blooded execution. 2 vulnerable people, one of them a 70-year-old great-grandmother, shot in the head. And for what? Greed, money. When it was Alex's turn to speak during sentencing, well, if anyone expected to hear remorse or maybe I'm sorry, well, they would never get that. Instead, this is what Alex had to say.
I did not kill my grandparents. I never would. One day, we all will die, and I hope there's a God so you can all ask him if I did it, and I hope you all choke on that answer. When he tells you I did not, don't give me any leniency because it's not going to be given anyway. Throw me in prison and lock away the key if that makes you all happy.
And did you see that part where he not only spoke out angrily to the judge, but then he turned to the gallery to speak to his very own family? I mean, I don't know. Well, listen, one person who was not impressed was the judge. And he sentenced Alex to 60 years in prison for each murder charge served concurrently at the same time, plus 5 more years for the weapon charge. No parole, no early release, no second chances for this guy. Gene Alexander Scott was just 26 years old. He was now looking at spending the rest of his life behind bars. You know, he'll probably be close to his 80s before his sentence is even close to up. But listen, with South Carolina's no parole policy, he may never walk free again. Since his conviction, Alex Scott has filed an appeal, and as of this recording, he maintains that he was wrongfully convicted and he hopes for a new trial. But for now, he sits in a South Carolina state prison, probably for the rest of his life. Thank you so much, True Crime Army, for listening, for watching. If you want to hear more military true crime stories, be sure to smash the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. So I want to know, what do you think? Was justice served for Gene Rogers and Billie Ruth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And I'm not going to lie, after watching the Cold Justice episode back in 21 or 22, I remember being very weary of the evidence that they had. Yeah, the Google searches and his cell phone. But it wasn't until I heard that he had discussed the plot with his friends that I was ultra convinced that it was this guy. In any event, I'm glad they caught the perpetrator, and now the Rogers family can rest in peace. All right, True Crime Army, I want to say thank you so much for joining me for today's deep dive. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll be back next time with another military true crime story.